Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Thursday, everybody. We begin today's video with 2 economic topics. The first on surging local debt, the second on the related area of the ongoing property crisis. But first, we note an important development. Yesterday, Wednesday, the party's 24-member Politburo gathered for their monthly meeting, pledging to tighten political control and discipline, according to state media. Interestingly, a date for an already delayed meeting to map out China's long-term economic plans, the third plenum, was not set. We note this development and now move into our main stories. New official data published by the Ministry of Finance on Tuesday showed that China's local government spent a record 1.23 trillion yuan, $174 billion on bond interest payments last year, up nearly 10% over 2022. Outstanding local government debt has already been steadily climbing over the past few years, reaching 40.74 trillion yuan by the end of 2023, a 16% year-on-year increase. Chinese financial media outlet Caixin, reporting on the news, writes that this amount included general bonds, whose proceeds were used to pay for non-profit projects with no revenue, and special purpose bonds, which raise funds mainly for infrastructure investment. However, it did not include local authorities' off-the-books borrowings, quote, which are estimated to be in the tens of trillions of yuan and include bonds issued by local government financing vehicles, state-owned companies set up to finance local investment such as building infrastructure, end quote. The Finance Ministry data show that nearly 90% of the principal of local government bonds maturing in 2023 was repaid with funds raised through issuing new bonds. Caixin adds that mounting interest payment pressure has been eating into local government's revenue. Quote, if both the on-the-books debt and all the interest-bearing local government financing vehicle debt had been taken into account, local governments would have had spent 19% of their total fiscal revenue, which consists of general public budget revenue and government-managed fund revenue, paying interest in 2022, end quote. Of course, one of the biggest hits to local government revenue has been the property crisis. We turn to this next. But just quickly, if you're enjoying today's episode, I have a huge favor to ask. That is to like and subscribe. This helps the channel grow. And for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable, I rely on your support primarily to keep the channel going. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. As always, thank you so much everybody for the ongoing support. This week, Guangzhou, Suzhou and Shanghai, all major urban centers with tens of millions of people collectively, have removed some more housing purchase restrictions to try to boost their local real estate markets. In a notice released on Tuesday, housing authorities in Shanghai announced that non-local residents who have paid income taxes into the city for at least 5 years will be allowed to buy one house in suburban areas of the city. According to a notice from the southern megacity of Guangzhou, properties with a floor area of more than 120 square meters are excluded from housing purchase restrictions. And Chinese financial media outlet Yicai reports, citing an official, that Suzhou's Housing and Urban Rural Development Bureau will no longer review the eligibility of those residents who want to buy new or pre-owned homes. Quote, these moves are straight from the old playbook and worked in previous real estate cycles to signal that a bottom was close, and potential home buyers and speculators, conditioned to the idea that prices were only going to go up for the near future as confidence in economic and personal financial growth was strong, would start rushing back in, driving up transactions and prices. I think many people believe some of those fundamental assumptions. A bottom is near. Prospects for economic and personal financial growth remain bright, are either broken or very much in doubt. And so I would be very surprised if these relaxations of housing purchase restrictions have much more than a marginal impact at best. One problem policymakers may face is the mood around Lunar New Year holiday, as people gather with family and friends. How many people are going to be talking about how much money they have lost in the stock market or in property, or have lost their jobs, or had salaries and benefits reduced, or know people who have. Negative energy can be contagious, especially when much of the truth behind it comes from facts." End quote. In a special 21st Century Business Herald commentary published today, the state-run financial outlet says China needs to do more to support the housing market. Quote, "If market transactions cannot be restored in a timely manner, it will intensify the liquidity pressure facing the real estate companies and affect market expectations. The slowdown in investment will likely have a greater effect on the macroeconomy." End quote. In a special commentary called "China Intensifies Efforts to End Property Crisis," also published yesterday, Chinese financial media outlet Caixin writes that sources at several bank branches said concerns over default risks and issues regarding accountability for lending decisions have been widely expressed among banks, given the continued depressed state of the real estate industry. Quote, "Everybody is confused," end quote, an official responsible for real estate business with a major bank said. Quote, "Banks are reluctant to act until they get clarification on whether they will be liable if loans granted to private developers turn sour." End quote. Caixin explains that lenders are also waiting for the authorities to issue their long-rumoured whitelist of property developers who will get priority for loans. Quote, "Several banking insiders said a whitelist would basically hold regulators up as guarantors of the creditworthiness of the companies included, and that concerns about who would be held accountable in the event of a default would need to be addressed." End quote. Meanwhile, the housing situation, years into crisis, still looks bleak. U.S. financial media outlet Wall Street Journal writes today, quote, "A string of indicators, new housing starts, housing completions, and home sales all point to a sector in deep distress. Price controls have meant that officially home prices across major Chinese cities have declined only marginally from the peak in 2021. End quote. However, many economists estimate that in reality, home values have depreciated more. Wei Shan, chief China economist at Goldman Sachs, expressed this week, for example, quote, "My best bet is that nationwide prices have gone down around 20%. End quote. If accurate, this would represent tens of trillions of dollars of lost household wealth. And even officially, the sharp slowdown in China's home sales dragged on in January, despite policymakers stepping up efforts to arrest the slump. According to preliminary data from China Real Estate Information Corp, the value of new home sales from the 100 biggest real estate companies slid 34.2% from a year earlier to 235 billion yuan, $33 billion US, following a 34.6% decline in December. January's sales were down 48% from the previous month, a record low in recent years. Next up, William Burns, director of the US CIA, has published an article in Foreign Affairs called "Spycraft and Statecraft," with a large focus on China. This is an excellent opportunity to hear, straight from the proverbial horse's mouth, just how elite intelligence policymakers in the US are thinking about China. We end today's video by examining this piece, which we are now quoting selected excerpts from directly. "No one is watching US support for Ukraine more closely than Chinese leaders. China remains the only US rival with both the intent to reshape the international order and the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to do so. The country's economic transformation over the past 5 years has been extraordinary. It is one for which the Chinese people deserve great credit, and one that the rest of the world has broadly supported in the belief that a prosperous China is a global good. The issue is not China's rise in itself, but the threatening actions that increasingly accompany it. Chinese leader Xi Jinping has begun his third presidential term with more power than any of his predecessors since Mao Zedong. Rather than use that power to reinforce and revitalize the international system that enabled China's transformation, Xi is seeking to rewrite it. In the intelligence profession, we study carefully what leaders say, but we pay even more attention to what they do. Xi's growing repression at home and his aggressiveness abroad, from his no-limits partnership with Putin to his threats to peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, are impossible to ignore. In this volatile, divided world, the weight of the hedging middle is growing. Democracies and autocracies, developed economies and developing ones, and countries across the global south are increasingly intent on diversifying their relationships to maximize their options. They see little benefit and plenty of risk in sticking to monogamous geopolitical relationships with either the United States or China. More countries are likely to be attracted to an open geopolitical relationship status, or at least its complicated one, following the United States' lead on some issues while cultivating relations with China. And if past is precedent, Washington ought to be attentive to rivalries between the growing number of middle powers, which have historically helped spark conflict between major ones. While Russia may pose the most immediate challenge, China is the bigger long-term threat. And over the past 2 years, the CIA has been reorganizing itself to reflect that priority. We have started by acknowledging an organizational fact I learned long ago. Priorities aren't real unless budgets reflect them. Accordingly, the CIA has committed substantially more resources towards China-related intelligence collection, operations, and analysis around the world, more than doubling the percentage of our overall budget focused on China over just the last 2 years. We are hiring and training more Mandarin speakers, while stepping up efforts across the world to compete with China, from Latin America to Africa to the Indo-Pacific. The CIA has a dozen or so mission centers, issue-specific groups that bring together officers from around the agency's various directorates. In 2021, we set up a new mission center focused exclusively on China, the only single-country mission center. It provides a central mechanism for coordinating work on China, a job that extends today to every corner of the CIA. And we are also quietly strengthening intelligence channels to our counterparts in Beijing, an important means of helping policymakers avoid unnecessary misunderstandings and inadvertent collisions between the United States and China. That ends the direct quote and today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a wonderful Thursday, and I will see you all tomorrow.